What's happening? Welcome to another installment of Real Soul. I'm Von Monroe here with Lee Bay. And today we're going to talk about the romantic comedy.
Romantic comedy, of course, is one of the more popular genres. Boy meets girl, boy loses girl, and the laughter ensues. And we've got our favorites, but we want to ask you yours. So what is real romantic comedy to you?
Love and basketball.
Well, I like how Stella got her groove back a lot. That's like a romantic kind of dramedy.
Coming to America, I like that too. So,
like any of the Medea movies.
Brown sugar.
Well, that's interesting, some of the responses. What I chose to be an example of real romantic comedy is the film Bustin' Loose. It stars Richard Pryor and and Cicely Tyson, has a cameo by Paul Mooney. And in this film, basically, Richard Pryor is an ex-con who is forced by his probation officer to accompany Cicely Tyson on this cross-country trip with these unruly kids from Philadelphia to Oregon. And along the way of the trip, he and Cicely Tyson sort of, as they overcome the obstacles of moving the kids across, they actually end up in a romance between the two of them. One of the things about Richard Pryor that's interesting, I think it's interesting, with him as a leading man is that he could display this kind of vulnerability. So in order to showcase that, I actually chose a clip that's unusual. I'm not going to show him doing like sort of the traditional things that you would expect a leading man to do in a romantic comedy. I'm actually going to show him in a clip with another one of the characters. Like I said, this Cicely Tyson is a social worker, and she has these children who are troubled. Really, part of the reason that she's taken them from Philadelphia to Oregon to live on her parents' ranch because they've exhausted whatever they can get from the city of Philadelphia. And these kids do have some problems. And so I'm going to show a clip of Richard Pryor interacting with one of the troubled kids.
what are you doing?
Playing war.
Why are you trying to set it on fire?
I guess it got blown up.
Hey, man, I know what happened to your parents was an accident. I know you didn't mean to do that, Anthony.
It wasn't my fault. I was standing near the curtains, and I was playing with the match, and they caught, and I tried to wake up my parents, but they wouldn't wake up. And then the fire started spreading, and I just couldn't. Oh, Joe. I didn't mean it.
I know you didn't mean that. It was an accident. You understand? An accident. Nobody needs to do stuff like that. But you gotta throw it away now. You gotta leave it in the past. It's gone. Your parents would want that, Anthony. You gotta try now. You gotta leave that stuff alone, man. I love you, Anthony.
That's a very, very tender scene. I mean,
Yeah.
and Richard Pryor really does a great job there. It's one of restraint, and he gives the kid his due as an actor, and seals it up nicely there. It really shows the range and the power that he had.
You know, it's interesting. Sometimes when you're directing actors, there's times where you have the conversation. You want them to be honest. You want them to be in the moment. There's one part in there where the kid, when he's first sort of making his confession, Richard reaches his hand over to touch him just to sort of reassure him. And you can talk to an actor and tell him to make that choice again and again. If they're a skilled actor, maybe they can make it real, maybe not. But there's something else that's actually inside the person that makes that sort of thing real. And I think that kind of vulnerability was what separated Richard from the comedians of his time and from times now as well.
Well, indeed. I mean, it really shows the leading man quality and all those great things. And of course, this movie is probably better known for one scene in particular in which the bus breaks down, in which they're on, and Richard Pryor goes to get help, and he sort of walks in the interesting shot how they did it. He kind of merges accidentally into a Klan sort of meeting, and they're walking the same way. But he fixes the situation in an interesting way by convincing the Klansmen that the kids are blind, and they ended up sort of helping in this weird sort of way. And there's some laughs in there too.
Yeah.
Now, my pick for romantic comedy, you were in the 80s. I went even further back to the 60s for The Love of Ivy, a movie with Sidney Poitier and Abbey Lincoln from about 1968. Interesting movie in that it's about Abbey Lincoln, who's a maid for a white family, and she wants to leave and she wants to go to college and sort of go to school and better herself. They think that if she only has a man, then maybe she'll stay around a little longer. She can just find love, which is kind of antiquated to think about now.
Maybe.
In this debate, right? Maybe, I don't know, right? So in this scene, we see in this scene, we see some interesting interaction between Abbey Lincoln, great jazz singer and actress who was in some iconic movies, including Nothing But a Man, we talked about before, at least privately.
And we'll talk about it in the future.
And we'll talk about it in the future. And of course, Sidney, probably in a way that we really hadn't seen him before. So for The Love of Ivy, 1968.
Is it true they give you baths?
Who gives who back?
Japanese girls.
I take showers twice a day. Generally by myself. But it is fun to take a shower with someone.
I've never done that.
Well, you obviously have been going around with unsanitary men.
I don't go with anybody. Why don't you sit down and get comfortable?
I'm comfortable.
Why don't I rub your feet?
I can rub my own feet. And I would if they hurt. Which they don't.
Just like color TV, the fish tank, or like home. When I was a little girl, my grandmom used to take me fishing. Sometimes it was the only food we ever had. Never go home. Well, there's a great big orange juice canning factory where my grandmom used to live. Can I get you a cookie?
Can I get you a cookie?
Words to live by, right?
Yeah. Oh man, Sidney. This film is interesting because Sidney at this point I think needed to start doing some other stuff to change his image. This film came out during the height of the civil rights movement, and there was a way in which Sidney was beginning to sort of cross barriers, but he had been doing it primarily by being kind of a sexless black man, a black man who was, you could trust him around the nuns and so on and so forth. They had this one thing where he's with the blind woman in a patch of blue. Mm-hmm. Even with that one though, he goes and sort of rescues her from the squalid poverty that she's living in. But they don't end up having. She begs him to have sex with her, and he says no. And then at the end, you can tell by the way that they separate that it's just not going to happen. So I don't know what he was doing with that woman, except making folks feel better during that time. Mm-hmm. But Kaufman wrote an article about that in the New York Times, Why White America Loves Sidney Poitier, where he sort of bashed him for continually appearing in those types of films. And he said that by doing that, he's actually not helping the race problem. He's just sort of pacifying the white audience, in that if he wanted to see him do something more revolutionary. And he started making films like this. And then he made the series of films that he directed himself, one of which we're actually going to be talking about later as well. So I think that he had to take more control over his own image, because I think that people were satisfied watching him do Lilies of the Field.
Indeed, and it's great in this scene, in this movie, of course, to see him fall in love, to see him be a sexual character, and to finally sort of do that. And we see this a few more years later in a movie that's woefully underseen and not talked about as much as it should be, which is Brother John, in which he and Beverly Todd, the beautiful Beverly Todd, have a very tender relationship, ill-fated in some respects, but very tender relationship that's worth noting. Of course, even more later in A Warm December, where it's also maybe sort of ill-fated, but a beautiful and adult relationship.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that wraps up this edition of Real Souls. Join us next time, in which we're going to talk about something with a little more punch to it. We're going to talk about action movies. So until then, I'm Lee Bay.
And I'm Von Monroe, and this is Real Soul.